Here's a question for you. What are you learning about the nature of man you didn't know before the year 2020? Today's crisis is revealing a side of man most of us have never been forced to look at. I'm Geoffrey Botkin. On this podcast, we attempt to discern the differences between noise, meaning, and wisdom in the areas surrounding the current global crisis, which is now truly a multifaceted crisis. Epidemiologists are evaluating the current mutations in the COVID-19 virus, trying to predict what will happen in September, and they don't know yet. Economists are trying to determine what will happen to an unproductive international economy and what it will do to all the bankrupt nations. Political scientists are trying to fathom a world without a local police presence. Is that even possible? Well, technically, yes, it is. All our neighbors who are policemen in our local communities could literally be fired from the local police force. The local police force could be defunded. And then some national or global military could provide something like an armed force to make sure that we all comply with the current government, a compliance force. And so how, as we look at all these questions, how do we discriminate between responsiveness and reaction, right and wrong, courage and fear, good and evil? How do we think analytically with sound judgment? This is a difficult discipline, especially when agitation, alarm, and melodrama are the main tools of discourse. On this podcast, you will meet gifted writers and observers who have the breadth of perspective to see what's going on in several dimensions at once, including the moral and the historical dimensions. These two are the most important to me, but we cannot leave out the details, and we won't leave out the details of the sociological, the biological, the technological, the historical, and most importantly, the theological dimensions. As I read some of these better thinkers and identify some of the more responsible writers, I keep asking myself, what is it that makes some men observant and astute and others blind to the obvious, insensitive to the deeper implications, willfully blind or stubbornly unreasonable? Well, the sound thinker, and here's what I'm learning as I study this, I look at this, and I analyze some of their writings. The sound thinker is an agile thinker who combines objectivity, honesty, and knowledge in a thought process that rarely shuts down, because he is thinking all the time. He is comparing what he is thinking about to the things he is observing, and it just simply doesn't stop. The sound thinker doesn't fall back into inflexible denials or prejudices, but he calibrates available knowledge with wisdom and experience, and then he reevaluates what he has concluded. He's not so proud that he just thinks that he's the only one who's come to the right conclusion on this. He continues to think about it and to talk to others and to have discourse with others and free discourse. That's what is so important about the freedom of speech. Keeping that open, keeping those doors open to dialogue and conversation going on between people. And so here I hope to have examples every week of writers and thinkers who are doing a really good job at this and possibly some who are doing a very poor job at this. And the ones who do well, they think a lot like scientists using the scientific method. They use logic, they use rationality. And these are our friends, these disciplines. The scientific method involves systematic observation, and we'll try to do that here on this podcast. Measurement. We'll try to measure what we're seeing. And then experiments and the formulation, testing, and modification of hypotheses. The very first thing that we conclude may not be right, and within minutes or hours or days we can actually realize that we made a false hypothesis or a weak one that needs to be strengthened. The thinker's most useful insights are built on a broad range of facts and observations, and many, not just a few. So he needs to be well-read, he needs to be experienced, and the ones who I have met, of course, the ones who seem to do best are the ones who've been around the longest. Now, let me mention two often forgotten perspectives. Hindsight is not the same as foresight. And today's loudest critics on what was done wrong yesterday or what wasn't done yesterday when it comes to the pandemic or the riots or the social chaos or the economy, these critics are not men who were giving calm and measured recommendations at the time. Anyone can be smart with hindsight, but few are wise in the present moment, imagining the future with a cool-headed, analytical outlook. That's what I hope to become. I hope all of us can become more of this kind of sound thinker. And so this is what we need to do to get there. Along this journey, through today's crisis and then tomorrow's crisis, we can note what is driving the decisions which are being made every single hour and categorize them for what they might be. It might be fear of death, might be opportunism, might be political opportunism. It might be good old-fashioned greed. It might be guile. It may be the fear of man that caused people to retreat and react and disappear. It might be the desire to be popular. For example, there are decision makers on the scene who are so corrupt that they would destroy an entire economy just to manipulate the political stage, just so that they could gain enough ground to attack a sitting president on his Achilles heel. And there are decision makers on the scene who would demolish a local criminal justice system simply to satisfy those who might accuse them falsely of racism. So these crises of 2020 are revealing the nature of man in ways most of us have never been forced to look at man's real nature, really deep down. And the dirt floor of men's souls is not a real edifying thing to look at. What is being revealed by the disintegration of today's culture? Let's think about it a minute. At this point in history, no one can opt out of the hard work of discriminating thinking. We've got to apply our minds to this. We must think our way into the future, and the more we can do this together, the more likely we can share wisdom and get it right. At the present, we have a chaotic flood of information and misinformation and endless reckless speculation and conspiracy theories and some conspiracy facts and, of course, fake news and endless accusations. The dominant media is really good at keeping our focus on the superficial and the sensational, the fearful and the frightful, and to keep up a crescendo of noise. And if we don't cut through this noise and go deeper, we simply remain part of the problem, participants in an emotional charade of commotion and provocation and fear. And I don't want to be a part of that. You don't want to be a part of that. So I want to invite you to join me in the conversations on this channel, on this podcast. And let's do better as we think our way through this with faith and rationality and informed optimism. I am actually really optimistic about what can happen in the future. Many of the things that have fallen apart in the early months of 2020 have simply opened doors for a kind of progress that was simply not available to us last year and the year before. So please do feel free to send me questions on any topic at all, or suggestions or your comments on what you are getting out of this. I look forward to communicating with you. Thank you for joining us here.
If you like content like this, please consider subscribing. If you know others who would benefit from this material, please share it with them. To connect with us directly, please visit geoffreybotkin.com and send any questions or thoughts that you might have to questions@geoffreybotkin.com.